Hello everyone, this is J.B.J and welcome to the CakePHP 3 tutorial, part 3, about routing and views. Now, first of all, I apologize for the time between part 2 and part 3, but we just got a huge order in at work and I've been doing a lot of overtime to get that order through. But now it's done and I'm ready to continue the series. So, let's get on with it. In this video, we are gonna implement a feature so that we can search through our bookmarks by tags. And I'll show you what that means in a second. We'll have a talk about routing, we'll implement a new controller action, and we'll have a look at finder methods. So a lot of new stuff, but it's very exciting because these are some very core concepts and they're very powerful. So let's jump right to it. In the previous video, we made this, or in the previous 2 videos, we made this bookmarker application. Now in the last video, we implemented, at the very end, we implemented password hashing. So if we get a list of our users, we implemented this hashing of the password here. That's what we concluded the video with. Now, if we view this list of bookmarks, you can see that right now I have added 3 bookmarks. I have CakePHP, PHP, and soup. Now if you view these, we can see that this one is tagged as a tutorial, and this one is also tagged as a tutorial. However, the last one here is tagged as cooking. Now imagine that we got like 100 bookmarks. It could be helpful if we could sort through these bookmarks. For instance, we could say, okay, I want to view all the bookmarks that had to do with cooking, and then I would get soup. Or I want all the tutorial bookmarks, then I'd get these 2. So obviously this is a feature that we would have to implement once we get a certain number of bookmarks. And that's what we're going to implement in this video. The way we control this is actually using the URL. Up here you can see that I'm in the localhost environment, I'm in the bookmarker project, and I'm viewing the bookmarks page. Now imagine I could say something like tagged tutorial, and that would get all the bookmarks marked as tutorial. Or I could say tagged cooking, and I would get all the cooking bookmarks. And that's what we're going to implement in this video. Alright, so this is the project, and this is the Bookmarks Controller, and we're going to be doing some work with this one. But first, we are going to implement a route. Now, a route is how we control the requests. For instance, you say, I want to view this page at this specific URL address, and then we can use routing to redirect you to the proper page. If we go into our config folder, it's up here in the top, and then we go into routes.php, we have a lot of routes. Or actually we don't, we have a lot of comments that defines how the routing works. We are going to be adding a new route. And I'm actually going to clear out a lot of these comments because there's really no need to keep them around. So just going to do this, remove this, and there we go. Alright. There. So we can see that we have a router class, and it has a few static methods. The first static method it has is a default route class where we pass in routes. Now we're just going to leave this here. It's like sort of an initialization process, so we're going to leave this there, leave it. Then we go into the other method here called scope. Whoops. Now the scope method, it takes a few parameters. It takes one here, and then it takes a function as a parameter. Now in this function, we also pass in routes into this function, but in this function, we are actually creating our routes. Or we're creating one route. And I think the best way to explain how it works is simply to implement our own route. So if we call the scope method on the router class, we will first pass in bookmarks. Then we'll pass in controller. And please notice that this is in an array. Excuse me. Controller bookmarks. And then the function where we pass in routes. There we go. And then we call connect on routes, and we pass in tagged / anything, and the action will become tags. There. Yeah. Okay, so this method, I'm just going to take this down here. Then we have the first parameter here, the second is here, and the third is here. Yeah, that should work. There. Okay, so what we have here is actually an URL structure. We say that if you write /bookmarks, then we want to use the controller named bookmarks. So this is the bookmarks controller we have over here. The function takes in the routes here, and on the routes we call the connect method. Now the connect method defines which method we want to direct the request to. And we say if you write /tagged and then /anything, this means anything, then we want you to go into the action named tags. So if you go and you write something like /bookmarks /tagged well, anything, you can write anything here, then you'll go into the tags method on the bookmarks controller. So that's how we define them. Now this syntax is a little weird, I'll give you that, but it makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of information. You know, we specify the controller, we specify the method, we specify which parameters you can use here. So you just have to write this a few times yourself, but most of the time we'll just be copying an existing one and throwing that down. And you can see what we have down here is actually the same. This is just another route, and you can have multiple of these routes. And it just says if you write a / we also have this function here again, then we would go into the pages and the action would be display. And again here you can write pages or anything, and you'd go into another one. So that's pretty much the same it does. But we don't want these anymore. There's no need to keep these around because we don't even have a pages. Oh yeah, we have a page controller. But I don't think we're going to need these one. So we're just going to have a fallback. And this is like a default route. So it's like if all else fails, we'll go to this one. So we might as well keep it there. Okay, so now we have the new route defined. And as I said, this will call the tag method in the bookmarks controller. So this is how we structure the URLs, and this is how we can control how they look. And this is actually important from a SEO perspective, search engine optimization. Then you want your URLs to look clean, and that's how you can control it. So let's try and fire it up. So here we have the application, and remember I said we could write bookmarks /tagged / well, pretty much anything. I'm gonna go into this, and whoops, it says missing method in bookmarks controller. Well, that makes a lot of sense. The action tags is not defined in the bookmarks controller. Right, we said we wanted to use the tags method in the bookmarks controller, but we haven't implemented it yet. But we can do this to verify that our routing works. So implement the route, fire up the URL, And if you get this message, it means the routing is working, but it just can't find the action to take you to. And that's what we're going to implement next. So we go into the Bookmarks Controller, and in here we have the index method, the view method, the add method, and the edit and delete methods. So at the very bottom, I'm going to be adding a new method. It has to be public, because if it ain't, you can't find it. It's a function, obviously, and we're going to call it tags. Now, I'll just throw in a die here, die test, and let's try and fire up the request in the browser again. Okay, so obviously I'll try and refresh the browser now, and we would want to see that we get into the method. And we do. We can see that it dies and it writes out test to the screen. So that means we know the request goes through and we know it lands in this method on this controller. Great. So now let's implement what this method is actually going to do. Okay, so back in PHP Storm, we have the method down here, and I'm going to remove my testing. And then I am going to fetch the tags. Now remember, this method, in this method you can pass in parameters like if you said tag / cooking, we would want to look for all bookmarks with a cooking tag. So obviously we need to get this somehow, and we can see it's not a parameter, so we need to extract all these past parameters. And the way we do this is we call this request params. That's an array, and we get the values at the key pass. That will get all the past parameters, and all parameters that's in the URL here are called past parameters. So now they will actually be in the tags. So let's just say we are getting all past parameters. So now that we have these, we can use the bookmarks table to actually find these tag bookmarks. So find the tagged bookmarks. Just call it bookmarks. And the way we do that is we say this bookmarks find tagged tags and tags. There we go. And to finish off, we will pass this into the view so that we can work with it. So we say this set, and that takes in an array. So and these are all the parameters we want accessible in the view, and we want a parameter called bookmarks. That's the bookmarks, and we want a parameter called tags, which is the tags. There we go. Okay, so here we have the tags method. First we get all the past parameters. Then we look up all the bookmarks that has a tags of tags, so we look for these, and that's passed in here. We look it up in the bookmarks table because we want to find bookmarks, and we always look up in the database by using the find method, and we'll go into more details on that in a minute. And then we pass on the variables to the view. So in the view, we could access all the bookmarks that we extracted here using the bookmarks variable, or all the tags using the tags. So it's a short method, but as you already know, we got a lot of power from 3 simple statements. I mean, we get all parameters, we do work on the database, and we send stuff to the view. I mean, a lot of power, and it's very compact, and that's what makes Cake both powerful and hard to understand, because you really have to think about what these methods they do. Okay, so moving on, we'll be creating a finder method next. Before we go and implement this new finder method, let's just try and see what happens if we fire up this request again. Unknown finder method tagged. Alright, so remember that we had a code that said, bookmarks find, and then the first parameter was a string in which we inputted tagged. So the finder method expects there to be a tagged method, which doesn't exist. And that's what we're going to implement next. So in CakePHP, or in any model view controller application, we want to keep our models fat and our controllers slim. So in order to adhere to this ideology, CakePHP has moved a lot of stuff to the models. And that's where we're going to implement the finder method. You can also see that when we say this bookmarks find, we are calling the find method on the bookmarks model. So we go into the models folder down here, and then we have three folders. We have behavior, entity, and table. We're going to go into table because we are working with the database table right now. And then we have this bookmarks table class. We are going to be implementing our own finder method, and it already has a few functions that comes with CakePHP. We don't want to mess with those. We're just going to add our own finder method. It's going to be named find tagged, and there's a very good reason for that. It takes in three parameters: a query object named query and an array of options. Okay, let's just go back to the Bookmarks Controller, and here we call the find method and we pass in tagged. That means that the application expects there to be a method called find tagged. See, we pass in tagged, so find tagged, like that. And it expects that to be in the bookmarks table model. So that's the error we got before. So we implemented the method now, and these are the default parameters it takes. And then we are going to return whichever result we generate, and we're going to call find. And find is like the basic lookup method. It looks up in the database. And then we're going to use distinct. Bookmarks.id. And then we're going to call matching tags. Whoops. Matching tags. You say function with a Q, and it's gonna use the options like that. Have the function body here, and that returns Q where. There we go. Sorry for this. I'm actually used to writing on a Windows machine, and now I'm back on my Mac, so gotta get used to all the key bindings. Options of tags. There we go, and there we go. Let's just see. Yeah, all looks fine. Now, a lot of stuff is going on here, and I'm going to try and explain this best as I can. This is a custom finder method. Finder methods are used to look up in the database. We know that. This is a very, very powerful concept in Cake, and you're going to be making a lot of these down the road. So let's try and digest this method. These parameters will always be passed in. The query here is like a query builder. If you know string builder, it's like the same thing. We build up the query, then we execute it, and then we have an array of options passed into it. Now, finder methods manipulate the query and then they add different criterias and conditions to the query. And when they are done, the finder method returns the modified query object. So this will return the modified query object. And in this finder method that we've implemented here, we are using distinct and matching methods. Matching with a G. There we go. And they allow us to find bookmarks that have a matching tag. Using this one, we say we want bookmarks with a matching tag. Then we say this is a function, takes in Q, and it uses the options array we have passed in here. And what it does is that it returns Q, so it's a query, where the tags.title is in the option.tags. And that's the real meat of our finder method. That's what ensures that we'll get only bookmarks that has a title that is in the option and then of the tags. Options and tags. This matching method, it accepts a anonymous function. That's what this is called. This is like an anonymous function. And the only argument that takes is query builder. It's like this one. And inside here, we just define the condition to filter it. That's pretty much what we do. Now, this can be tricky to understand, but the first one, that's pretty easy. You know, we find all bookmarks with a distinct bookmarks ID. Great. Once we've done that, we find all matching tags where the title is in the option of tags. So it's very reader friendly. I mean, when you read it, it makes a lot of sense, but there's a lot of syntax rules you have to remember, and I just recommend you copying whatever I'm doing, or go into the documentation, look it up until you've done it enough times so that you can do it from memory. Now, if we try and fire up our method again, let's just go back to the Bookmarks Controller here, and in the very bottom, we're just gonna say test again, and let's see if we can get down to this point, because that means it knows we've implemented the finder method. That's the last error we got. Okay, so here we have the last error. It said it couldn't find the finder method tagged, so let's hope it says something different now. Oh, it just said test. Great, so it must have found our bookmarks. The next thing we're going to have to do is implement the view, and that's the very last thing before we've implemented this whole process. So let's get right to it. Okay, so if we go into the template folder, that's where we're going to place the view file. We go into the bookmarks, then we create a new file. We're going to call it tags.ctp. Now, CTP are view files in CakePHP. You can see we have these add, edit, index, CTP files. So that's how we implement them. And we're just going to implement a very simple view file. It's just pure HTML, even though we said .ctp. Doesn't matter. Just to see if we can getting all bookmarks with certain tags. There. I'm just going to start with this and see if we have a hole through to the view method. But before we do that, we just have to remove the die. There we go. And now let's see if we can get into the view method. So we run the query again, and we're in the view, getting all bookmarks with a certain tag. Now, you may have noticed something that I do, and I actually tend to do this when I'm working with Cake. I test regularly. I test if there's a hole through to the method. You know, I tested if the routing works. I tested if we got into the controller method. Then I tested if we got into the finder method. I tested after the finder method. I tested if we get into the view method. You know, I test that all these connections exists before I actually write the meat of the application. And that's just how I like to work. And it's something I can recommend until you get more experience, because if you start to like program for an hour and you don't test, then you might end up running into a lot of problems where you have to go back to older code and change it. And I just find that this flow works better. Okay, so let's implement this view. Okay, so in the header here, just gonna I'm gonna leave this, and then we're gonna use PHP, and we say this text to list tags, and just open up the Bookmarks Controller. You can see we set a few variables here to the view. The first is bookmarks, and the next is tags. So the tags variable will hold all the tags. Remember, we extracted the tags, all the parameters. So that will hold all these tags. So in the view, we can access the tags variable, and it'll print out all the bookmarks that we're searching for. Then down here we're going to make a section, just purely semantical reasons. We're going to make some PHP, a for each loop, and we're going to access the other parameter, bookmarks. And in the Bookmarks Controller, that's the variable that holds all the bookmarks extracted from the database. Extract them as a single bookmark. Now there we go, we close it off there, and then we open it like this. Then we can write HTML in between, and the loop will function. So we write an article now, and we are going to use something called the HTML helper to create a link. It's going to be in H4. Then we say this HTML for HTML helper. It has a method called link, and we're going to pass in the bookmark title as the first parameter and the bookmark URL as the second parameter, and that will generate a link for us, and the text will be the title, and it'll link to the URL of the bookmark. Bookmark URL down here again, and we're going to use something called the text helper to format text for us. You can see that we're using a lot of CakePHP even in the view file here, and that's why we're using CTP files, or one of the reasons. So this text, also paragraph, bookmark of description. Okay. Some of this is just pure HTML, so I assume you're familiar with this. And we have the standard for loop here where we go through all the bookmarks passed to the view. And remember, the bookmarks and tags are passed to the view via the controller method. And in the view method, we're also using the HTML helper to create a link, and we're using the text formatter to create a paragraph text. Now we also use H. Now H is a shortcut function to HTML encode output. So whenever you are outputting user data, you should always encode it to prevent SQL HTML injections. So it's just an easy way of doing it. I think the H just stands for HTML encode, for extremely short. Okay, let's try and fire up this and see what happens. Okay, so the moment of truth. We're getting all bookmarks with a certain tag, anything. Okay, so we look at the URL and we have anything. Okay, let's change this to tutorial. Okay, so now we get all tags with tutorial, and we can see we have CakePHP and we have PHP. This is a link because we created it using the HTML helper, and we also have written the URL in small down here. And then we have some text. We can also get all cookings, and then we have the soup. And we could also get all cooking tutorials, for instance, like this. Then we get all cooking and tutorials, so we can get several bookmarks, like this. So let's go back into the code and have like an overview, because this was a lot to take in. A lot happened in this video, so I'm just going to go through the motion once again and explain everything that happened. If you already feel like you understand everything, you can just move on, but for completeness sake, I'll just go through the process and explain what's happening once again. Okay, so the first thing we did was that we implemented this router method. So whenever we wrote /bookmarks, we would go into the controller named bookmarks, and in this function here, we passed the method we want to connect to. So whenever we wrote bookmarks and we wrote tagged /anything, and now this anything is what enables us to write like several parameters, because everything we write after the tagged separated by slash will like be a different parameter. So we could say like if this is the URL bookmarks and then tagged, then we can have like this is parameter 1, and this would be parameter 2, this would be parameter 3, and so on. And these were all called past parameters. And the action we're going to call is tags. So this URL structure will call the tag method or tags method on the Bookmarks controller. Now, in the Bookmarks controller, we implemented the tags method. The first thing we did was that we got all the request parameters. And that's everything after the tagged. Then we want to find all the bookmarks that had a tag in these parameters. So we called find on the bookmarks table. We pass in tagged, so we symbolize that we want to use a custom finder method. Then we pass in an options array where we say tags is the tags. So we pass in the tags here, and we store them in the tags key. After we fetched all the bookmarks, we set the view variables. So bookmarks will be bookmarks and the tags will be the tags. So that's how we pass in these variables to the view and the names we use to access them in the view. If we called this X, we would have to write X when we access it in the view. We then went into the bookmarks table and we implemented the finder method. And the finder method is probably the hardest part of this tutorial, and to be honest, there's a lot of things I don't even understand about it yet. This is also a learning journey for myself, but right now we should just copy it in and just read it, see if you can understand it when you read it. First you have to understand why we have to make a custom finder method, because we said find tagged, so it's called find tagged. So the naming convention in Cake is very strict, as you might remember. And then we return whatever we find, and we call find on ourselves because the finder method is like the basic method of looking up in the table. And then we use distinct and matching to actually get it sorted. Now distinct is just like saying we want to distinct them by the bookmarks.id, but the matching is what actually does the sorting for us. That's where we say, using this anonymous function, that we only want to return tags with a title in the option of tags. And remember, we passed in the options array, we have tags as the key, so that's the same key we use there to access the parameters that we pass in. And then we implemented the view, and there's a few things here, but it's not too bad. Here we just have a text helper that creates something into a list for us. It's a very efficient way to do it without having to do it for each. But down here we do it for each because we need to access the bookmarks object. And you can try and debug out a bookmark object if you want to see what it contains, but obviously it contains a title and an URL and a description that we access in order to create our view. And that is it for this tutorial. It was a pretty long tutorial, I know that, but as you saw, we had a lot of ground to cover. We learned a lot of new stuff today, but to recap, we learned about routing, custom finder methods, and the whole process of creating a new route and into a certain action and implementing the view. So like that basic pattern we just implemented ourselves. So a lot of core concepts learned today, and I hope you learned something. I know I did, and I promise it won't be as long before we move on to the next part of the tutorial. And that's where we're going to be adding a login feature to the application, so that we have this form of security authentication. And PHP, CakePHP has something called components that we can use to create a simple login feature. So we have a lot of exciting stuff in the future, and thanks a lot for watching. As always, please do subscribe, throw in a comment or a like to support me, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.